Guys, this is a dark video again, but I got a word from the Lord last night. He told me to share it with all of you. The word I got from the Lord is about the end times. He told me last night that every one of you is wrong. Every one of you is wrong about what you're teaching, what you're believing, technically what you're receiving through prophecy, revelation, all these different things. The trend of prophets today is that when they receive things, supposedly from the Lord, they don't check it with him, they don't test it. They don't test the spirit. And if you are sinning, if you sin, automatically that disqualifies you, because sin is the number one door opener to demons and the doctrines of demons. You cannot know the truth if you are sinning. So you can't receive entirely accurate information if you are sinning and be able to trust it. That automatically disqualifies you. There are many people who receive things and then interpret them themselves, and then taint the testimony of the Lord, what he's saying to them. And then what they educate the world with, what they broadcast to the world, is polluted with their own presumptions and opinions. When you receive things from the Lord, you have to make absolutely sure that what you're hearing is him. And you can't know that simply by asking if Jesus Christ came in the flesh and then running with it. You have to purify your heart, otherwise your heart is going to answer for you. You need to continually put everything you hear on the altar and let his refining fire come down and burn out the dross, and do that over and over and over and over and over again. Put it before him constantly until you're absolutely sure that what you have is pure. Corruption is very easy to let in. Your own opinions, your own speculations. Corruption through demonic voices as well. Speaking in the middle of you receiving things. You have to make sure, especially because lying spirits abound, and a lot of spirits like to lie about this subject. It's a very sensitive one. There are many prophets who are saying all kinds of things. The other problem is that a lot of what people receive from Jesus, when they do receive from him, is spiritual. And it cannot be unpacked by the natural mind. It can't be understood by the natural mind. The interpretation of these things is spiritual, highly coded, highly encrypted. Words don't mean what you think they mean. Phrases don't mean what you think they mean. And Jesus does this deliberately to see if you'll humble yourself and go to him about it. Even if the interpretation seems obvious, you have to ask him. You cannot take anything straightforwardly when it comes to prophecy, interpretation, and things about the end times, even things about the book of Revelation. I've been receiving things for years about the end times, but the Lord's never told me to broadcast it to anybody, because for years now, I've been steadily receiving things, and I'm still putting it under his refining fire, checking it, testing it, asking, making sure, and keeping silent about it. That's more than what most of you can say. There are also times when people hear from the Lord. Let's say a person hears from the Lord, and the interpretation of what they hear is highly spiritual. It's highly encoded. Then someone else hears something that's from the Lord, and what they hear sounds like it explicitly contradicts what the other person heard. When you take it at face value and look at the words, naturally they contradict each other. But what many people don't realize is that both of the things that each person heard are spiritually interpreted, spiritually understood. Spiritually, they don't contradict each other, but the words seem to. And people don't realize that they need to go back to Jesus and find out what the missing piece is, because we know in part and we prophesy in part. People hear things and then they act authoritative about it, and they speak as if they understand. They don't realize that Jesus is testing them. They don't realize as well that when he tells his servants to speak out and say things, even things that appear to blatantly contradict the scriptures, Jesus is testing those who are listening to see if they'll go back to him, instead of arguing with his servants. And even if it seems completely wrong to them, if they'll go back to Jesus and find out, okay, is this spiritually understood? Is there high-level wisdom in this that you have to unpack for me, Lord, and you have to explain to me, why did your servant say it this way? Why did your servant say this? Why does this sound like it completely contradicts everything that you stand for? Are you paying attention to the words, or are you paying attention to the Spirit? Are you asking Jesus and humbling yourself? And when you do hear things, are you absolutely sure that he even wants you to share them in the first place? Presumption is so fatal. But if you are not checking and checking and testing and testing and testing and asking, and making absolutely sure that Jesus even wants you to say anything at all, you are in error. The fact of the matter is, even if what you're receiving is correct, as soon as you say something that's wrong, whether an interpretation or an opinion, or whether you mix in speculation with what you hear, or even if you hear something that's corrupted, that gets added on to everything else that you heard, that automatically makes you wrong. There are many people who do hear from the Lord about these things, but as soon as you say one wrong thing, even in the midst of all those other right things you've been saying and hearing, that makes you wrong. Someone who teaches right things and also wrong things is still wrong. That's why the Lord told me, all of you are wrong. All of you on here who are teaching things about the end times are wrong. You say that's presumptuous and that sounds arrogant. Go back to Jesus. He's testing you. He's testing you on how you're going to react to what you hear, whether from his servants who are speaking, or whether you're going to test and check what you hear supposedly from him. He speaks to us in the dark, individually, hiddenly, and we're only supposed to speak out when he tells us to. Many prophets broadcast what they hear and run with it. They don't slow down. I can't stress enough how slow and cautious you have to be. I can't stress enough how much you have to be careful and let Jesus spoon-feed you slowly everything about this. Slowly. And even then, you can't trust it until you've absolutely made sure that everything you're hearing is completely purely from him. And when you do speak out, because Jesus told you to, be an oracle of God. Oracles of God speak the burden of the Lord. They speak exactly what he tells them to say. And then, once they're finished, they shut up. They say nothing beyond what he tells them. They say not one word beyond what he tells them. They have no time for opinion or speculation. They have no time for fantasies. They speak the word of the Lord, and then they shut up. Are you speaking word for word what he gives you, what he inspires you? Is every word that comes out of your mouth inspired? Are you listening to him moment by moment as he inspires you to speak? That's what oracles do. Be an oracle. Be like a tape recorder. Speak the word of the Lord, and then back up. Say nothing more. That's the fatal error of prophets, or at least one of them. They hear, and they may speak the prophecy, but then they speak their own interpretation. And if they're given interpretation by Jesus, they speak that, but they don't make absolutely sure that every single one of their words are polished, pure, and perfect. They don't make sure that they're absolutely inspired by him, and thus they lead so many astray. So if you are sinning, you are not even close to the truth. If you are moving in presumption and you're not absolutely sure, and you haven't tested over and over and over again, you haven't purified yourself, and you haven't been completely convinced by Jesus from his testimony that what you're hearing is true and that you're supposed to speak, if you're doing anything else and moving ahead, you are also in error. That's why I say, as Jesus told me, all of you are wrong. Because even those of you who are hearing something that's right, or some things that are right, or even if you're hearing mostly things that are right, you also throw in garbage, and therefore you taint a testimony, rendering everything you say polluted, incorrect. Make sure that you are testing things and checking things, and make sure that you're listening spiritually to what you're hearing. Judge righteous judgment. Judge spiritual judgment based on the inspiration of the Lord. Don't judge by the appearance of your eyes. Don't judge by your own mind. Don't judge by your own emotions. Don't judge the servants of the Lord and what they say, based on anything but what Jesus tells you, what you're sure he's told you. Make sure that you know. May the grace of the Lord Jesus be with every one of you.